community. And now I'm happy to introduce our next presenter, John Pytel. John Pytel is co-founder and CEO of conferences.i, and he's been a speaker before and has showcased some of his technology in the past. Conferences.i, an award-winning audience response system that, like I said, we've used in past live conferences, and hopefully we'll get to do that again in the future. John graduated from Michigan State University with a BA in marketing and entrepreneurship, and after a brief stint with the Nielsen Company, he left to pursue his entrepreneurial dreams. John is leading conferences.i with the mission of building the best audience engagement tool on the planet. And the company was recently named one of Chicago's top 5 coolest startups by the Chicagoland Entrepreneurial Center. So welcome, John Pytel.
Thank you very much. Do I have, I think I need to get made a host. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right, so everyone. All right, can everyone see my screen now, hopefully? Okay, it looks like it. Awesome. All right, so this is a fairly quick presentation here, so I'll kind of just cut to the chase a little bit, but I'm going to make this a bit interactive and actually use conferences.io during the presentation. So if you have another device on you, if you want to give that QR code a scan, or if you don't and you just want to pull up another browser and go to NASBA.cnf.io, when you get there, just like tap on the session that you'll see on the list. If you do the QR code, it'll bring you right into the session. I'll also throw the direct link into the chat real quick in case everyone doesn't have something that can scan a QR code. Let me get this rolling here. All right, so once you get into the session, it's going to ask you to check in. Just go ahead and put in your name, email. We're not going to put you on mailing lists, or anything, but we just want to kind of showcase like our attendance tracking, functionality, and we'll actually kind of show you the certificates and all that. So when you get there, just go ahead and check in, and then throughout, I'm actually going to ask you guys to use conferences.io for the Q&A questions. So you can submit the Q&A questions by using that little plus sign and ask button. You can upvote questions you want answered. And then we're going to do a couple of poll questions throughout as well. Those will appear on your screen. So again, nasba.cnf.io, or just scan that QR code. We're going to actually start out here with a quick poll question. And I just want to get a sense of, kind of who's in attendance today, different types of organizations. So I'll go ahead and launch that. Let's see who we got. All right. Okay, awesome. Looks like a lot of firms, kind of a good mix. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, it was kind of just a general catch-all with the other NASBA sponsor, but all right. Perfect. Seems like some votes are still trickling in here. I'll give it another second or two. Cool. All right. So again, it's going to be a quick presentation, but I'm going to start out with just kind of a brief history, conferences.io. So when we started conferences.io just as an engagement tool for live events, right? Making presentations, sessions interactive through Q&A and polling and all those different types of features, ultimately with the goal of improving learning. And so along the way, we kind of naturally just started getting adopted in a lot of continuing education type settings across multiple different industries, because it's a great tool for learning, but particularly within the accounting space. So we started learning about NASBA and how the tool was able to help with some of the group live standards, like the element of engagement, Q&A, session evaluations. And along the way, we started hearing a lot of demand for something to help solve this attendance tracking pain point, right? We kept hearing over and over, hey, we're already using conferences.io in all of our CPE sessions because it helps with learning and engagement. Is there any way we could also use it to kind of help us figure out a way to get around these sign-in sheets or like badge scanners? So in 2018, we really kind of dove in to better understand what this pain point was all about, why we were hearing about it so much. And we ended up launching this full attendance tracking functionality on top of the product that was really designed specifically for group live. And it was a total home run, right? So here's a quote from one of our customers showing how they were able to replace their sign-in sheets using what we call like our kiosk mode, which is essentially a digital sign-in sheet. Here's another one we had to keep anonymous, but it's talking about how many hours we were able to help save them for tracking attendance at all their conferences, not to mention all the money they were spending on the badge scanners previously. We built out integrations with many of the the big LMS or AMSs in the space: LC Vista, Prolera, AMNet, Cornerstone. We even added our own CPE certificate functionality where you can generate and send certificates right from conferences.i. So if the organization wasn't using an LMS, or even sometimes a firm might be using LMS for internal, but not for external, right? So there's where you can automate the certificate process for those as well. This was a case study we did with the Virginia Society of CPAs. And prior to implementing conferences.io, they were spending about 320 hours a year, reconciling attendance from, badge scans, sign-in sheets, all that. And after implementing conferences.io, they were able to reduce that down to only 55 hours a year. So it's an 80% reduction in time spent, which is pretty significant. So by the end of 2019, the accounting industry become our single largest customer segment, doing somewhere over 10,000 sessions or events a year. And then COVID hit, right? And suddenly live events became extinct, and they really have been for the past year and a half or so, really until recently. So it took us some time, but we kind of realized eventually that we're not going to stay 100% virtual forever, but virtual is here to stay, right? We're like, it's a new ball game now. We're not just going to go back to the way that things were. And while there's still some questions, and uncertainty, and organizations are still trying to kind of figure out how this is all going to work, the future of CPE programs is going to be some combination of formats, right? And there's for our customers and the folks that are dealing with CPE, there's a lot to think about, right? And a lot of like possibilities to try to plan around, thinking about getting back to to in person, whether that's kind of a seminar or full conference. There's of course going to be a lot that stays entirely virtual. There's a lot of talk about going to the hybrid format, right? Which theoretically makes all the sense in the world. You can get back to having it in person, but you still allow people to connect virtually. Given all of the changes that are probably going to be happening just to the workforce in terms of a much more flexible and remote workforce, the kind of satellite or remote office format is probably going to become more and more prevalent, where you've got groups of people joining the session virtually, but they're joining it together, right? Like not individually. Maybe you'll need to plan around a combination of all of these, right? It's in person in one office. You've got groups of people in other offices attending, and then you open it up to individuals to attend as well. So on top of all of those just different formats to kind of think about and plan around, the compliance standards differ, right? Whether they're joining there in person or virtually. The instructional design differs. During the first session, we talked a bit about this, where typically like conference sessions or webinars are that one-to-many lecture format, right? Whereas like the classroom, what we call like the classroom style, seminars, trainings, it's really the anti-lecture, right? It's much more two-way interaction, doing breakout discussions, coming back to the group, things like that. The ability to participate differs, right? It's very different, a person who's in person compared to someone who's joining virtually, online, compared to a group of people who are joining virtually. So everyone's kind of like juggling all these different platforms and technologies right now, right? You got to think about sign-in sheets or something like conferences.io for your in-person trainings. You got to do badge scanners or something like conferences.io for your conferences. Maybe use one virtual or webcast platform for your internal virtual CPE, but like you've got to use a different one for external. If you do conferences, maybe you need something more robust and you need to have a full virtual conference platform. then you got to figure out, how are we getting all these certificates issued, or all the data back into LMS or an AMS. There's just so many different variables right now, kind of leaving everyone feeling like this lady in the picture here. It could be a bit overwhelming. So our new vision is to calm that chaos, no matter what the new normal looks like, and it will probably vary based on organization to organization, but to become just that single attendance tracking engagement solution for all live CPE, meaning whether it's group live, group internet based, or a hybrid, whether it's that classroom seminar training or a conference format, whether it's internal or external, but just that one solution that you can rely on. So looking at how we can help with these different types of formats with group live, this is where we started, right? This is where we also started initially with the attendance tracking, and we built out different modes or options kind of depending on the format, right? We've got one designed for that classroom style seminar training. We've got others that are designed for like a conference. What we tried to do is just like replicate the solutions that were already in place, right? So the one in the middle there, we call our kiosk mode. That's designed to be a digital replacement of a sign-in sheet. The one on the right, we call that our self-reporting mode. That one's designed specifically for like conferences, because oftentimes the solution in place, it wasn't badge scanners, it was this kind of self-reporting form where the attendees would fill out the different sessions they went to and hand that back in. And then the one on the left, we call our self-check-in mode. This is kind of a hybrid. It can work this is really our most popular mode overall, but it works across the board. The attendees use their own device to check in and out of sessions. On top of that, I mentioned there are a few other NASBA requirements that we can help satisfy that element of engagement through the polling tool, the Q&A, the evaluations. All those features are built in, combined with the attendance tracking. So just a one-stop shop that just covers your back on all of those compliance requirements. I also wanted to particularly point out, going back to that kind of remote office or satellite format, where you've got groups of people in different places attending virtually together, that qualifies as group live, right? They're not joining individually from their computers. That's still group live. Conferences.i as a solution works really, really well in that scenario. And this was happening even before the pandemic, but we kind of expect this to be even more prevalent now. But with Conferences.i, they can all check in the same way. They can, rather than having to have them all fill out a sign-in sheet and then scanning it in or something, you can do it all digitally, right? It's as simple as sending someone in the group a link, and they can all sign in from the kiosk, or they can just use their own device. And if you're incorporating the other things like the elements of engagement and all of that, everyone's able to participate together. We'll talk more about that in a second. Now, looking at the group internet-based CPE, the requirements are all the same as that what I cover with Group Live, except there's one big additional one, right? There's the attention verification checks. 3 times per credit hour, having some sort of proof that the attendees were actually paying attention, which when it comes to the virtual CPE is really important, right? If we look back actually at the responses that were coming in during Cassie's session, the first session, all the challenges with virtual, that was the number one thing that I saw most commonly responded was like distractions, multitasking, being in other meetings, things like that. That's exactly what this verification check is intended for, because it is much more difficult to police that when they're joining virtually. So I want to do another poll question now, and just kind of find out like how your organization is currently satisfying the attention verification checks. Right? Are you doing content related polls or questions that actually are tied to the content? Are you using polls that are just not related, right? It could be as simple as like, are you still here, or just kind of random questions? Are you doing the code words route, or maybe something else? So we'll go ahead and launch that poll. Let's see what the group says. All right. Okay. That's right in line with what I kind of expected. It's a mix, right? but polling, by far is the most common. And a reason for that is that nearly every virtual platform or webcast platform, they have some basic interactive features, right? They've got a little chat box. Sometimes they've got a separate Q&A thing, sometimes not. Like Zoom webinars have Q&A, but meetings don't. And they all kind of have these little basic multiple choice polls built in there, right? While convenient that they're built into the platform, the problem is that they're clearly not keeping the attendees engaged. Right? Like every survey or study that comes out on virtual learning or virtual events, they say the number one challenge is keeping people engaged. Right? One study here found that 81% of virtual event organizers or hosts were using polling to improve the interaction, but only 1% of them reported that they found it easier to keep people engaged when virtual. Right? So yes, while they're convenient that they're in there, it's pretty clear like it's not really cutting it, and it's not giving you enough to truly keep them engaged. So for those that are doing content related polls, multiple choice questions are great, and they're probably the most common on conferences.i as well. But conferences.i was built from day one to be that engagement tool, and we offer the type of functionality that goes above and beyond just choosing from a list, right? Where you can do open-ended questions and put them in, a word cloud or like a Wordle, or use our thought bubbles for questions that require a bit of a longer, response. And this one's kind of cool, like the built-in functionality where the screen will just continue to scroll to show new responses, so the instructor can see all of them that were coming in. These give you the ability to engage outside of just choosing from a preset list, right? Actually hearing the opinions of the attendees. Allowing them to voice their opinion or their answers, seeing how other people are responding. And I found it kind of interesting actually that Cassie, during the first session, all of the polls that she incorporated, right, and she's the expert on this, all of those polls that she used Mentimeter for were open-ended, right? She wasn't using just like the kind of basic multiple choice. We also offer things like brainstorm polls, where the attendees can submit their ideas, they can vote on each other's ideas. We kind of keep it all anonymous on the attendee sides to avoid any sort of bias. But then on the results side, you can essentially crowdsource the favorite ideas or favorite responses. We've got things like trivia style games where you can either compete as a team or compete individually and sort of gamify things where there's points involved. Functionality like pre-post comparisons, where in this example we can see at the start only 24% of people got this question correct, but now at the end 85 are getting it correct, so it can kind of show that some learning occurred, right? While this example was used for learning assessment, this could also just be used to see how opinions change from the start to the end. We have things like demographic comparisons. So this was actually a pulled from our live data that you guys responded to those other polls, right? We asked what type of organization, and then how are you, satisfying the attention verification check. And so what now we can see, right here live on screen, like how each segment kind of differs, right? Looks like the majority of, everyone does a fair share of the content related polls, but, which makes sense here. The suppliers are much more not applicable than others, right? Regardless of whether you're doing content or non-content, based polls, we also identified some just general pain points kind of across the board when using those built-in, webcast polls. It all varies based on, platform to platform, right? They're not all the exact same, but in general, kind of require you to manually create the polls from scratch every time, right? Even if you're doing just like, are you still here poll questions, you got to create those over and over again every time. They require someone to manually launch the polls, right? Which in a lot of cases leads to instructors forgetting to launch the polls. We talked to so many organizations that have said, yeah, we now literally have someone sit in just for the purpose of launching those polls. For multi-hour sessions or sessions that are for more than one type of credit, knowing which polls belong to which hour or field of study, right? If someone comes back and they did 4 out of 6 polls, Well, does that mean that they did 3 in the first hour and 1 in the second hour, vice versa, 2 and 2, right? That's important in terms of eligibility for credit, but with the built-in polls, it's not always easy to identify that. You oftentimes have to really do some digging and figure out which polls they responded to. If it doesn't integrate, if you use an LMS and the webcast platform doesn't integrate right back to it, compiling the data and getting those certificate issues can be kind of a nightmare, right? Like these webcast platforms aren't built specifically for CPE. So the reporting that they give you isn't always perfectly optimized. And then, like I mentioned before, just that necessity of using multiple different platforms based on functionality differences or limitations, right? We talk to so many firms that are like, yeah, we want to get to Teams, but their reporting isn't there yet. Or their polling doesn't really work very well. So while the rest of the organization is on Teams, for CPE, we've got to use Zoom or WebEx or whatever else. So conferences.io, we're able to solve a lot of these pain points. The creating polls from scratch every time. We've got functionality where you can copy polls from prior sessions. If there's a course that repeats multiple times, you can copy the entire course and everything's boom, built automatically for you. You can integrate the polls directly into the presentation, just like I'm doing here today, where it makes it really seamless for the instructors. They move from slide to slide just like normal, and the polls automatically launch. You don't have to worry about forgetting to manually launch it. You can tie polls back to specific fields of study, so that scenario I laid out earlier where someone responded to 4 out of 6, it doesn't exist. You can know exactly which polls that they responded to. And then just in terms of the messy data or getting those certificates out there, like I mentioned, we've got a variety of LMS integrations. We've got our own certificates if you don't have the LMS. You can automatically calculate and adjust the credits, right? You tell the system, here's how many polls they need to be eligible, and it will automatically adjust. And everything that we do is designed specifically for CPE. So all of our reporting, even if you do need to dig into a report to figure something out, it's designed in a way, it's optimized in a way for CPE. Now, we realize that not every organization has the time, resources, or energy to always do content-related polls. So we actually did build out another feature specifically for these attention verification checks, centered around this concept of code words. And the idea was just to, as closely as possible, automate that side of the compliance, right? And so the way that this works is that essentially you just tell conferences.io how many codes you need for that session. It automatically generates these 3-digit codes and creates a set of PowerPoint slides that you download. And all that needs to happen, really the only manual part of this process, is just getting those slides into the presentation. So, literally copy and pasting, dragging and dropping those into the presentation deck. And then once the code word slide shows up in the presentation, the attendees just click that little code words button. And this is an actual example. Feel free to play with this right now. If you click that little code words button on conferences.io and pop in 335, you can kind of see how it works. It'll tell you if it was accepted or not. You don't have to submit these immediately. If you're someone that would rather write things down and do it all at the end, you can do that too. On the reporting side, again, we're able to report back the number of code words completed, even down to the specific field of study if you need that. And then like I mentioned earlier with the polls, you can automatically calculate and adjust the credits based on their completions, again, down to the field of study, right? So in this example, we see that he completed 3 out of 3 of the auditing codes, but none of the tax. So it automatically adjusted them to being eligible for the auditing credit, but not the tax credit. And then all that data is either sent back to the LMS, or you can do the certificates right from conferences.io. Now, with the code words, we're not discouraging the use of content-related polls, right? Because content-related polls is kind of what we started with, and it's a really effective tool for learning. The way that we look at it is, if you don't have the resources, time, team to always do content-related polls, right? The code words can just basically automate the attention verification checks, right? So use the code words just to cover your back and make your life easy in terms of compliance. But if you or the instructor still want to incorporate some polls for learning purposes, they absolutely can. We designed it in a way where they play really nicely together, but you can incorporate those polls for their intended purpose, which is learning, right? And you can do it without all the added pressure of, okay, we've got to come up with enough polls, let's make sure to come up with an extra one in case one misses one. What happens if we don't get through them all? All those other pressures, you can just keep the polls focused on what they're meant to do. So we're going to do one more poll now as we just transition to the end here and talk about virtual platforms. So I just want to kind of find out what webcast, webinar, whatever you want to call them, what virtual platforms do you guys currently use or maybe plan to use for CPE purposes? Okay, Zoom, usually the leader there. A lot of Teams though, okay. Little battle between GoTo and On24. Cool. Okay, so we realize that like a direct integration into the virtual platform is ideal, right? And we try to do that whenever possible. We've already launched the Microsoft Teams app where you can assign the conferences.io session to the meeting ahead of time. The conferences.io is then just embedded like right into the Teams meeting platform. The attendees click a button and and it's right there. We expect the same type of app for Zoom to be available very soon. They've been a little frustrating for us on the timeline. They were actually the first ones to announce this whole app program. It was supposed to be back in January, then it was May, then it was just kept getting pushed. But last month they did finally launch their kind of like beta or early launch partner apps. So it should just be a matter of time now before they open it up. Once they do, we're going to jump all over it. But we're just still waiting on Zoom to open that up. For those of you that use WebEx is kind of unique in that they already have kind of a way to like embed things in there already using this multimedia share. But they recently announced the same type of apps program. The timeline's unknown on that, but they're all kind of following suit in terms of these apps programs where third-party tools can build right in. We've built out some other integrations where you can actually put the platforms into conferences.io. So we have one for Zoom webinars, YouTube live events. So for big kind of single track events or webinars, those can work really well. We partner with a variety of the virtual conference platforms, but really you can integrate conferences.io into nearly any platform, even if we don't partner with them. So with all that being said, we try to do those integrations as much as possible. We've also made like the distinct decision in terms of like our strategy still needs to be centered around that second device working just as well as if it were integrated, right? Because we realize we're never going to be able to integrate with all of the platforms that are out there. We can't be completely reliant on the platforms to begin with. And while there's some hesitation at times, it's very polarizing, the whole second device thing. Some organizations are all over it and love it and prefer it. Others are really hesitant to it. But the second device route can work great, right? Just like we've seen here today. Both my session and Cassie's, just scan a QR code and boom, it's right there. You can put in the link if they don't have a mobile device. So everything we've done has still been centered around like that experience has to work just as well. All right, so to wrap up here, I'll just talk about hybrid real quick. Now, with hybrid, there's a lot of enthusiasm for it. Like I said, on paper, makes all the sense in the world. Given all of the expected, just changes to like the remote workforce and the flexible, workspace, hybrid's pretty front and center. But there's still some questions about it too. And like we said earlier, virtual has a ton of benefits, right? There's downsides too, but a ton of benefits. One of those is that it's certainly very convenient, right? But like while convenient, it's not exactly the experience of actually being there, right? Whether it's an exciting, full-blown conference production like this, or even just being in the same room as the instructor, and your peers. So we see a pretty good opportunity for conferences.io here to help like organizations bridge that gap in terms of going to hybrid, right? A lot of the questions are around, well, how would that work for CPE purposes, right? Conferences.io can help bridge that gap and allow everyone to participate together, regardless of how they're attending, right? So they can check into the same session. Maybe the in-person attendees do it from their own device or a kiosk. The virtual attendees do it from directly from Teams using the Teams app or a separate device. Either way, but there's just there's one check-in point. You got one system that you're using to track the attendance. They can all participate in the same Q&A. They can all respond to the same polls, evaluate the same survey, right? Kind of making that experience feel a bit more like being there. So to wrap, I wanted to just cover, real quick, a couple of things we're also working on in terms of hybrid, where you'll actually be able to identify how people attended, right? So in this example, we can see, John was virtual, Jane was in person. So even though Jane didn't, respond to any of the polls or the code words, she's still eligible for credit because that wasn't a requirement for group live, right? But with John, since he was virtual, he needed to still do those attention checks. So there's other functionality we're going to be building in there, just targeted at that kind of hybrid expectation. So before I jump to Q&A, I was just going to show you really quickly. So this is actually, on conferences.io here. And so I was going to go in and just kind of show, here's what all the data looks like. We can see, everyone's names and emails, what time they checked in, how many polls they responded to, et cetera. And I'm just going to actually run this credit adjustment here. I'm going to say that you needed to do 3. Now, we're not an actual, CPE provider, but just demonstration purposes. But I'm going to say you needed to do 3 polls in order to get credit. I'm going to run that. It's going to automatically adjust everyone based on how many polls they responded to, right? And then I can literally, click a button and send everyone who's eligible a copy of their certificate. So you'll actually receive this. I put in the email, it's just demonstration purposes. So we're not actually a provider, but I just wanted to kind of show you that it's that simple. Now, if you had an LMS, you wouldn't need to use our certificates. You could just go back to LMS, but if you don't, it's that simple. So with that, I'll get to some questions. I know we started a little late, so I'm not sure how much time we have or not. You guys can let me know. We have time to get into some questions.
You do. You have a few more minutes for some questions.
Okay, awesome. And for any questions that I don't get to, I'll although we have a break after this, right? So I'm happy to hang out, and whoever wants to hang out, feel free. If you want to take the break, no problem. But I'll do a full Q&A recap and make sure everyone gets that too. All right. So the top question there: does this comply for capturing attendance for a virtual CP? Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, you got a couple different options. You can do the polls, you can do the code words, but all that was built centered around NASBA compliance. What if someone leaves and comes back? Can they check in more than once? Good question. Yes. So that's actually a fairly recent update we made, and you can even try it on, if you got conferences.io pulled up, you can check out and then recheck back in, when you return. You can do the same thing from the kiosk if we were using that. We then report back. So when we report the total minutes spent, it only counts the time that they were, checked in, right? So if I left, checked in 30 minutes later, and it was a hour session, it would show me as only attending for 30 minutes. Are you planning to integrate with any other LMS or AMS? So we don't have any specific plans, at the moment. We're always open if there's LMSs out there or AMSs out there that want to build in, they can, because we do have a full API for this. And actually a couple of our customers have like done custom integrations for whatever AMS that they use. So that's always available, but we don't have any specific plans for other integrations that we're going to be directly building, at least right now. You're telling me that I can click a button and it'll calculate credits instead of certificates. Yeah, essentially. I mean, I guess a couple of buttons, but that's kind of what I demonstrated there at the end. Literally, click a button, say how many polls or code words they needed to complete, and then click another button to get everyone their certificates. Can this integrate with any LMS platforms? So the ones that we have right now are LC Vista, Cholera, AMNet, and Cornerstone. How is total duration recorded for reporting and validation? Maybe I can come back to that when I'll share my screen and show you on the actual tool. If we have something like this in place, can we get rid of sign-in sheets altogether? Absolutely. We've done that for a ton of organizations. Sign-in sheets are like the easiest to replace, really. So that's a for sure on that one. And just tell me when I need to, stop and let people go on break.
Yeah, John, I think maybe answer one more question because our next speaker is going to be on board at 12:35. I'm going to give people a minute to have a break in between that. But obviously, these are great questions and it was a great presentation. So I'm hoping you can answer these questions that you didn't get to live and in a written format that we can share with our group post conference.
For sure. So I will. This one's fairly easy. So conference style, combined and engagement for a multi-day program, one certificate for all the sessions instead of multiple certificates for each. Yep, absolutely. Actually, on this example, let me jump back up. Here you can actually see that, so this is one, so the one in the background is like, the main certificate. This is the name of the overall event, tells them how many credits they got. But then this one that's up front is like the second page where it shows specific credits earned from each different session or day. All right, so I better put a plug in it for now, but I'll definitely do a full written recap and can work with NASBA to make sure that gets out there.
Thank you so much, John. This was really great. And, it's really exciting to see how the technology continues to evolve with time, because that's, and obviously all of us getting sent home and going to like virtual 100%, I think accelerated adoption of virtual learning. But then, if you don't have the technology tools, there's all the questions that are popping up in chat. And it looks like you all have looked at a lot of those things. That's really helpful. So we appreciate that. Yeah.
And thank you guys for the opportunity to present again. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, gang. So we're taking a break until 12:35 is when our next speaker is here, and we'll regroup then and enjoy your very quick lunch. Bye.